friends, Elizabeth here, back with another video in my Read It or Unhaul It series. This is a series of reading vlogs that I'm posting every month, compiling together the weekly reading challenges that I'm doing on Instagram and TikTok. This is the fourth reading vlog I'm posting in this series here on YouTube, so definitely check out the past episodes if you missed them. They'll be linked in the description box. And of course, feel free to follow me on Instagram and or TikTok if you want to follow along week by week and get a bit of a preview on what books I'm landing on and my opinions on them. But of course, here on YouTube, there's no time limit, which I really appreciate as someone who can talk, as you probably know. So I think that's enough explaining. If you want to know more, definitely check out the first video here on YouTube, again, linked in the description box, where I go much more in detail into the idea behind this and the inspirations and how the rules work and all of that. But without further ado, let's spin the wheel and figure out what I'm going to read first in October. Ooh, okay, Alone with You in the Ether. This is by Olivie Blake. I've actually had this book on my TBR for a while. I read the Atlas 6 shortly after it was traditionally published when it was all over the internet, and I really enjoyed it, so I picked up this book, which I believe this version that I have is a self-published version of this book. I'm gonna have to do some research, but I do think that this has since been traditionally published, so I might have to check if it makes sense for me to read this version that I have or if there are too many differences and I might want to read the traditionally published version. I'm hoping that this is close enough because I really don't want to buy a second copy, although maybe I could get it as an ebook from my library or something to compare the differences, but I actually know very little about this other than the fact that it's been recommended to me so many times over the years. So many of you have told me you love this book, that you want me to read it, and I was really excited to read it after I read the Atlas 6 because I really was very pleasantly surprised by that book. I liked it a lot. My excitement was a little tempered when I read The Atlas Paradox, the second book in that series, because that one really dropped the ball for me. So I was kind of hesitant to give Olivie Blake another chance, but the wheel has spoken, so we're doing it. Let me read the back to you because, like I said, I know almost nothing about this book. I don't even know if this is fantasy, but let me read the blurb on the back because I feel like we'll both get a better idea of what we're in for. Chicago sometime. She wanted to tell him, to teach him, every time you love, pieces of you break off and get replaced by something you steal from someone else. It seems like it's the right shape, but it's slightly different every time, so that eventually, very, very quietly, and over days and days and days, you are transformed into something unrecognizable, and it happens so slowly you don't even notice, like shedding scales and making new ones. He smiled at her like, "Isn't it great?" Yes, she thought, pained. Yes, it is perilously wonderful to suffer so sweetly with you. Intriguing. Well, you know, I don't fully know what to expect, but because so many of you have told me you love this book and asked me to read it over the years, and it's been on my shelf for so long, I'm excited to give it a go. Who knows, maybe this will be our first DNF of this challenge so far, but so far I am being as stubborn as I expected and really not wanting to DNF any of the books, so I wouldn't be surprised if I don't DNF yet again. I think the lowest rating I've had for any of the books I've landed on so far for this challenge was 3 stars, which is really good. So hopefully this continues in the same vein. I'm gonna go get started on this, and when I get to the halfway point, which I think looks like this is roughly 300 pages, so when I get to 150-ish pages in, I'll be back to share my mid-book thoughts, and we'll see what we see. Oh yeah, it does say a love story on the front. Is it contemporary romance? I'm in the dark. It's a mystery that I'm going to solve. So where do I even start? I'm halfway through Alone with You in the Ether by Olivie Blake, and full transparency, it's been, I think, 3 weeks since I started this. Let me double check. Hang on. It's been over 3 weeks, actually. So, not doing great in terms of my own self-imposed rules. Honestly, reading this book is making me kind of rethink my rules, in that I think maybe at the start of 2026, I might rework this a little bit, maybe set it up to be one book every other week or something to take the pressure off a little bit. And then if I finish it faster, great. Because one book a week is great if I'm really, in a great mood for reading, or if the book is fantastic, or if I'm super immersed, or if I have lots of time to read, or if I'm just, in a good place. But 1 week to read a book if I'm having a lot of brain fog, getting sick, which I have been the past week, if you couldn't tell from my voice. I waited until I could talk to film this update. I actually hit the 50% mark a few days ago, but I could not speak. But I'm still sick. So if you can tell, that's what's going on. But when I'm sick, when I'm traveling, when I have brain fog, when grief hits me like a brick wall, all those things make it really hard to read a book in a week, especially because I'm not just reading these books. Of course, I'm reading lots of other books for other videos and just books I feel like reading at any given time. So anyway, all that to say, I set myself up for a real challenge with this challenge, which I guess is apt, but this book is really putting me through the ringer. I have considered DNFing this several times. Okay. And for full transparency, full honesty, me and you right now, the reasons I'm not DNFing this are: one, sunk cost fallacy. I spent so much time reading this. I have annotated every single page, not just with tabs. I have written notes on almost every single page. I've put time and effort into this, okay? Also, I'm a stubborn bitch, okay? If you know anything about astrology, I don't really believe in astrology, but sometimes it's useful as a shorthand. I'm a Taurus moon, okay? And that is very appropriate. Also, my last name is Turnbull, like a bull, like the animal. And I feel extremely stubborn when a book makes me this frustrated that I somehow have to beat it by reading the whole thing. Like, I have to prove that I am superior to the book because I can withstand the suffering that it's imposing on me. It makes no sense, but stubbornness often makes no sense in my experience. Anyway, so that's another part of it. And then the other part of it is that I honestly am a bit baffled by my experience of this so far, and how much I am frustrated and how bad of a time I'm having, based on how many of you who share presumably a very similar taste to me in books, if you watch my content, who have told me that you love this book. And I feel like maybe the second half is the reason. Maybe something amazing happens in the second half that really is going to make me love it. I'm struggling to see how, based on my experience of the first half, but books have surprised me before. It's not unheard of. So I kind of want to give it a chance for that reason. Also, the last part is that as much as I know that I can be very blunt when it comes to my opinions of books, especially when I don't like a book, can't help it. That is also just part of my personality. I really genuinely hate feeling like I'm making people sad by ranting about a book they love. I'm always going to be honest in my reviews. I'm never going to pull punches or lie about my opinion of a book to try to be nicer, because I don't think that's really useful for anyone. But I do feel bad about it. So I am hesitant and kind of scared to review this honestly based on my experience of the first half, if that continues to the end, because I know some of you love this book. So I'm kind of hoping that the end turns it all around for me so that I don't have to do that and I can rave about it, because I do also, as a final point, generally far prefer to talk about books I love than books I don't like, for obvious reasons. There's just so much to say. There's truly so much to say. First thing is, I don't like either of these characters. I don't have to like protagonists all the time. I just don't really buy either of them. I find Aldo deeply bland and boring so far. He just doesn't feel like a real person to me. He's so bland that I feel that if it was revealed that Regan imagined him, that would make sense to me. Regan herself feels more like a real person. She's very flawed. I just don't like her. She doesn't seem like a very nice person. That can still be interesting. That can be fun. So far, the way she's being framed feels like it's kind of romanticizing her flaws. It definitely feels like it's romanticizing, perhaps not an eating disorder, but a very unhealthy relationship to her body and exercise and food, which I definitely don't love. She's not like other girls. She is stunningly gorgeous and very sexy, could sway any man, taken or single, to have sex with her in the bathroom at a museum in a millisecond with her sensual femme fatale wiles. There's just a lot going on with her, and I can't say that I enjoy spending time with her particularly, not the least because, as you might expect by the fact that it says a love story on the front, this book is meant to be a love story, or is at least framed like it's a love story, between Regan and Aldo. But Regan isn't single, she's in a relationship, and as of the 50% mark, she is still in that relationship, despite literally in the first chapter, she tells her boyfriend they should break up. But then she proceeds to spend the first half of the book not breaking up with him, but escalating in her cheating on him with Aldo. First emotionally, intellectually, now they're crossing several boundaries physically, and I'm not a fan of infidelity in general. And again, books can have infidelity, people cheat on each other. That happens. So fine. So far, I just feel like it's wanting us to root for them as the main couple, and it's trying to present her boyfriend as a shitty person so that we don't feel bad for him. But as much as he's a bit of a douchebag, cheating on someone is never nice, even if they're not a good person. Like, let's not romanticize it, right? Even if the person you're cheating with is your soulmate, if soulmates exist, break up with your partner first, you know? Unless you're in an open relationship or poly. At one point in a bit of an argument, her boyfriend basically tells her if she's gonna fuck Aldo, he would at least like to know, but like get it out of your system. And I feel like that's also kind of being treated as permission, except she isn't telling him the way that their relationship is escalating. She's not admitting the way that they are getting closer emotionally and the thought she's having about him, and still not cool, you know? And then on top of that, part of the cheating is a scene that I just found so wildly distasteful, not only because of the fact that she's in a relationship, but also because it was crossing so many boundaries for Aldo, because she wasn't getting his consent for something that I found wildly uncomfortable and unethical. Perhaps not technically classifiable as sexual harassment or assault, but something tangentially related. I'll talk about it in a spoiler section. I'm struggling with Regan, okay? Plot so far is pretty non-existent. The setup is also very sort of strange, where Aldo says, let's have 6 conversations. And then they proceed to have 6 conversations, even though they're strangers. Okay, we just finished the 6 conversations, so now we're getting into the next part, which I guess is they're done their conversations and they're maybe going to start an actual relationship. I don't know. I hope she breaks up with her boyfriend soon, because I'm struggling with that. But I don't really need a book to have plot, to be honest. I'm fine with plotless books as long as they're delivering on the character development, on the themes, on the gorgeous writing. Something that I've seen said so many times, and I've seen in the few reviews that I've peeked at, is that people love the writing style, that it's so gorgeously written and it's just poetry and so quotable. And I just beg to differ. I do not like the writing at all. I find it to be word salad. Honestly, I liked Olivie Blake's writing style in the Atlas 6, and there are aspects of the writing style that are similar there and here. It's not, you know, totally polar opposites or anything, but this just feels like a much less polished version. A lot of repetition and a lot of saying something in as long-winded and circuitous a way as possible, and I'm finding it incredibly frustrating. There are also sentences here and there that literally don't mean anything, as far as I can tell. There are sentences that I've spent, I kid you not, several hours trying to decipher, asked my husband, asked my sister, given them multiple paragraphs of context to say, what does this sentence mean? What does this pronoun refer to in this sentence? Can anyone tell me what is happening? And none of us can figure it out. And you know, I'm not the smartest person on the planet. So it's possible in some of these cases that I'm just not meeting the book where it's at. But honestly, I swear to God, there are sentences that just don't mean anything. Okay? And I'm finding it so incredibly frustrating because I'm trying to decipher it. I think, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I do think maybe some of the people who love the writing are letting it wash over them and just enjoying the rhythm of it, the flow, the lyricism, the fact that it feels so evocative and scrumptious and descriptive and lofty and intellectual and poetic, that they are letting it wash over them and feeling that flow, and that's what's really carrying them through the story. And I can't help but be sort of pulled out of that flow every time the book says something that doesn't make sense to me. And then when I go back and break down a little bit more the paragraphs that I kind of just rolled through, you know, letting it wash over me, like, yeah, okay, sure. When I try to actually decipher what every single sentence means, what the imagery is supposed to mean, what the metaphors and similes are telling me, how this ties into the themes and the character development. So often I feel like either it's saying something in a very clunky, unnatural way, or that it just doesn't make any sense, or is contradicting itself, or it makes sense, but it's kind of not saying anything at all, which again brings me back to word salad, which I think is the definition of word salad. Lots of words that don't really mean anything. And I feel that is a lot of the first half of this book, which is frustrating to read. Why? I'll try to find a couple examples for you because this really is my number one qualm with this so far. So we finished the prelude called a hypothesis, because for once, in a moment that was either everything or nothing, there would be someone else in Regan's universe, and from there, everything would be as it was, only very slightly different. So the moment was either everything or nothing. Okay, so it could be anything. Obviously, it's meant to be meaningful, because if it means nothing, then why am I about to read a whole book about it? You know, seems kind of pointless to tell me that. Fine. Then we get, at the end of this, everything would be as it was, only very slightly different. So things are only going to be a little different at the end of this. It's going to be everything or nothing, but then right after you're telling me that everything is going to be as it was, but only slightly different, which to me feels like something in between everything or nothing. It feels like just a little of something. So you're contradicting yourself, but also, why are you saying it like that? Like, you could just say everything would be different. Or you could say the universe shifted by 1 degree, but that was everything. Or I don't know, you could say it like anything. I'm not saying I'm a poet. I just feel like that is such an awkward way to word it, and it makes it feel more meaningful than it actually is. Also, as we get into the first sort of proper in the moment chapter, we get these stage directions, setting the scene, telling us the action, telling us what characters are doing. There are narrators of various kinds that are constantly changing. I hated this convention so much. I found it very irritating immediately, which is maybe funny because I come from a theater background, and in plays, of course, you have stage directions. I don't mind it in that context. It just felt so hyper self-aware and artsy in a way that I found very off-putting. And then it also at some point just drops away and never comes back again, at least so far. Maybe it'll come back again at the end. Just kind of felt like Blake forgot she was doing stage directions, which honestly I'm not mad at because they were annoying me, but why were they there in the first place? Just take them out. They don't add anything, especially the ones where it's just like a quick 1-sentence quip or a silly, stupid joke. Often they're just telling us things that we already know in a way that I find very annoying. Like, how redundant is this? We get told that Aldo walks into a poorly lit classroom and says exponential and logarithmic functions. And then it says scene, a university classroom. Okay. You just told us he walked into a poorly lit classroom. There are only so many kinds it could be, especially if he's talking about exponential and logarithmic functions. Perhaps some people study that in high school, but then there's 2 options and we could very quickly discover which one it is, you know? Like, why do we need a narrator who is a teenage girl who's barely paying attention? And then she describes a Jackson Pollock painting and finishes it off with, it's like abstract or whatever. Okay, I guess it's supposed to be funny. It's not landing for me. And then we get the most blatant example, which is on page 29, where the narrator tells us, foreshadowing, baby. Don't do that. Just don't do that. I can pick up its foreshadowing. Please stop. Of course, we get the same, everything would be the same except slightly different, but slightly reworded on page 38. Everything would be the same in there, precisely as it always was, except for one thing. So then everything wasn't the same. It wasn't precisely as it always was, because one thing was different. Why are you saying it like that? Like, again, it's not wrong. It doesn't not mean something in this case. These sentences do mean things, but they're just so, for lack of a better term, they are try hard, okay? She's trying so hard to make saying one thing was different in this room sound incredibly profound. And it's like, it's not that profound for a room that is usually the same to be different because there's someone there who isn't normally there. It doesn't have to be universes colliding and stars exploding and gravity being discovered. It could just be, oh, there's a guy there I've never seen before. Whoa, didn't expect you. Hi. You know? And then on the next page, of course, we get this idea once again, in case it hasn't landed for us yet. And therefore, in changing, everything would remain the same. Okay. Everything changing is how it stays the same because things always change. Okay. Again, is that supposed to be profound? Obviously, things are always changing. And this whole paragraph honestly annoys me because it's talking about Aldo being a genius apparently, and also being able to predict things. And he believes a certain set of things wholly and concretely. It says that tomorrow would look like yesterday, would look like 3 Fridays from now, would look like last month, that he would never be satisfied, that in 2 weeks, predictably unpredictable, it might rain, and therefore in changing, everything would remain the same. Which, like, first of all, you're saying that at some point it's going to rain, which will probably mean that on the day that it rains, it's not the same as the day before or the week before if it wasn't raining the day before or the week before. So then what you just said is not true, that every day is going to be exactly the same if it changes. And then later you say everything stays the same because it's always changing. But if on many of those days it actually is the same, at least if we're talking about the weather specifically, then it's not changing. So then what are you saying? Like, wow, it might rain in 2 weeks. You are a genius. Are you related to Karen from Mean Girls? And then at the end of this page, once again, we get the same sentiment for the 500th time, and we're only on page 39, because everything is always the same until very suddenly it isn't. Wow, my mind is blown. Everything is the same until it isn't. I've never considered such a thing. How will I ever be the same? Oh no, I will be the same, only slightly different, because this was so profound, only not. What are you trying to say? Then also we get on the same page, your future self will always see what your present self is blind to. This is the problem with mortality, which is in fact a problem of time. And I have qualms with that because first of all, your future self will not always see what your present self is blind to, because if your present self is blind to it, perhaps your future self will also be blind to it, especially because you're not defining how future this self is. If I'm blind to something in this very moment, am I going to be blind to it in the next 2 seconds? Probably. Will I be blind to it in a year? Maybe. Will I still be blind to it a decade from now? Hopefully not, because I will have grown and changed and maybe I'll have more context, hindsight on my life. But again, not necessarily. That's not like an ultimate truth or anything. Also, this is the problem with mortality, which is in fact a problem of time. What does that mean? What does that mean? So hindsight is 2020, I guess, is what that's trying to say, but in a more lofty way, in a way that sounds smarter. But then why is that a problem? Why is you growing and changing and becoming more self-aware over time, ideally, and understanding your past self better as you mature and grow and become more wise? Why is that a problem? First of all, why is it a problem with mortality? Because at some point there is no future self to fully clearly see yourself once you reach the end of your life, I guess. I feel like there are lots of problems with mortality, and I'm not sure that this is one that I would list among them, but okay, you're stating this like this is the problem with mortality, which I would argue against for many reasons, but then also, which is a problem of time. Why is it a problem of time? I don't see why it's a problem in general that this idea of hindsight is 2020, that you can have more insight into a situation once you get more distance from it. Why is that a bad thing? Like, yeah, it's great to have self-awareness in the moment and we can improve upon that skill, but it's not necessarily bad that you can have more understanding with more time. So I just like, there's so many things like that where I'm like, you're stating this like this is an ultimate. Chewy doesn't like it either. What, buddy? What is it? You don't like it either? Where are you going? There are just so many times that the book states things like that, like they are universal truths that will irrevocably change your life. And that's just debatable. It's debatable. I don't agree that is true. And also, what does it mean? What are you trying to say exactly? You're not telling me, you're just saying lots of words and then moving on. Okay, and then what? Carry your ideas to the conclusion, or at least closer, so that I know what you're getting at, please. And then sentences like this, like why Aldo was a chronic wonderer, compulsive with his pondering. That's what that means. Did you pull out a thesaurus to then just find a synonym for chronic and wanderer so that you could restate the first part of the sentence? It's laborious, okay? There are some interesting ideas coming up so far to do with art history and religion and theories of time, like eternalism is coming up. I think those are interesting. They're not being explored in any great depth, but when they are being talked about, I find it interesting enough. We're just spending so much time on essentially meaningless statements about random things that I'm really losing the plot. Also, this is maybe petty, but one of the major reasons I dislike Riken is that to a stranger she literally just met, she insults his haircut, and then when he says that his dad did it for him, she thinks, well, now she felt like a dick. And it's like, you didn't feel like a dick before, you just told a random stranger that his haircut was terrible. That's really rude. Why should he care what you think, first of all? But also, Keep that shit to yourself. He had an interesting jawline. What does that mean? What makes a jawline interesting? Will she elaborate? No, she will not. No, she will not. Will that help us envision what Aldo looks like as a character? No, because we don't know what an interesting jawline means. Also, apparently everything Aldo said was astutely informed, except this whole conversation so far, he keeps guessing things about her that she then reveals are not true. So how exactly is he astutely informed when most of the stuff he's saying, he's just randomly pulling out of thin air and it's not in fact true? I don't think those words mean what you think they mean. Also, this, how old are you? 3 years past my arrest, she said, whimsically. Oh, so whimsical. I just wrote, Jesus Christ. He indulged his curiosity. She wondered if he would. I mean, you just dropped that it's been 3 years since you were arrested when he asked how old you were, which is a totally normal way to respond to that question, and you thought he might not ask about it? Arrest for what? Counterfeit. Theft. He blinked, and she preened in his hitch of hesitation. That sentence does not make sense as written. She preened in his hitch of hesitation. You can't preen in someone's hesitation. That's not possible. You could preen at it, but not in it. And I realize that the version I have is the self-published version, but I do have the audiobook of the traditionally published version because I wanted to make sure that I could notice any differences as I went through. And that sentence is the same in the audiobook version that was traditionally published. So anyway, could just be a mistake, but considering how much of this book doesn't make any sense, it's just par for the course at this point. Clearly, their spheres of occupation had a tendency to intersect. No, they don't. He was sitting at your workplace, so your occupation, sure, but he wasn't at work. He was just thinking in a museum. His occupation is not thinking, I guess maybe kind of in part, but he also could think anywhere. His occupation technically is teaching at the university. So no, just say you frequent the same places, so you might run into each other again, because that's what you're saying. But why are you saying it like this? Also, it's not true. I am on page 48 of my notes, and I've read to page 156. And like I said, literally every page has handwritten annotations. So let me just try to focus on the ones that are most important, infuriating, perhaps more accurately. Her dress was an asymmetrical hem full of sharp, neat lines. It suited her, seeing how she was also tall and full of lines. First of all, what else is tall? The dress? How can a dress be tall? She is also full of lines. What does that mean? If you were to look at her as if she were a 2D shape that she is made up of lines, like sure, everything is made up of lines, but like lines can be straight, they can be angular, like you described the dress as asymmetrical and full of sharp, neat lines. Is she also full of sharp, neat lines? You didn't say that. She's also tall and full of lines. The lines could be curvy in any shape. That doesn't really tell us anything. Why? What are you trying to say? That's my response to almost everything in this book. What are you trying to say right now? And why are you doing it like that? More examples of why I really dislike Regan as a character. Like, for example, in her vision of a future with Mark, she imagines that someday in their 40s, they'll bribe a waitress to come home with them. And the fact that she's framing it as bribing is very unsettling. It would be one thing if you said, we would convince a waitress to come home with them, which is fine if everyone's consenting, but bribing? He watched her as she took a 120-degree turn into a corridor. Her stride was premeditated and unhurried, as if she'd mapped out a path defined by ambivalence and then followed its projection to the inch. Again, if I just said all those words quickly and you just let them wash over you, you'd probably be like, wow, beautiful. Except what does that mean? You literally say her stride was premeditated. She takes specifically a 120-degree turn into a corridor, like she's done this a million times, and she's very precise and exacting, you know? She's unhurried, but specific, okay? But then you say it's as if she's mapped out a path defined by ambivalence, which means not caring either way, being conflicted, feeling pretty meh about two options. Being ambivalent about something is not at all congruous with the idea of being premeditated and specific and exacting and unhurried and calm and specific. It is, those things are not in harmony with each other. As if she'd mapped out a path defined by ambivalence and then followed its projection to the inch. Again, bringing it back to this idea of being very specific and exacting, except she's ambivalent about all the possible options, I guess. What are you trying to say? Why is ambivalence the word you chose? There are so many other words you could have picked and put in that sentence that would have very much fit the general meaning of this paragraph. But at this point, with this word choice, I don't know what you're trying to say. And I swear I'm not overthinking it. I will be reading this at a normal pace and then just come across something and be like, wait, what? And go back and be like, huh? And then I'll reread it and think, that seems kind of contradictory, and then read it a little slower and then spend a couple minutes trying to make sense of it. Because I'm like, it must make sense, right? Like maybe I'm just not thinking hard enough. And then I think about it a little longer and think, no, that still doesn't make sense. One of the things I don't love about this book so far is it does feel like it's kind of romanticizing toxic behaviors like cheating, romanticizing, not necessarily an eating disorder. I don't think we don't have enough details so far for me to really call that, but definitely an unhealthy relationship to food and her body is also being romanticized. And it comes up a lot from very early on. Not that she typically ate much these days, and the pills had helped with what appetite she did have. Why is it being framed as the pills are helping with her appetite by making her eat less? That's the goal, is to not have an appetite? Okay, not a healthy perspective, but all right. The first month on this particular cocktail of medications had made her so sick she dropped an effortless 10 pounds. Great. Again, it's an effortless 10 pounds, but it's effortless in that you are sick constantly, which is not, like, that's not healthy. What? No. Again, perhaps not quite eating disorder realm, but definitely a disordered perspective and definitely tangentially connected to eating disorders, having had one. It's very familiar, okay? The feeling of hunger gradually becoming preferable to the putrid sense of rotting from the inside out. As far as Aldo could tell, any outward show of amusement by Charlotte Regan was either staged or a mutiny. No in between. And my note was, you've literally only met her twice, but okay. I don't love crowds, but no one does. I mean, I think there are people who actually love crowds. I'm not one of them, but I think they do exist. I also like that it's made a point that Regan's mother thinks that everything she does to irritate her parents and make their life more difficult. And it's framed like that's ridiculous. And that's because her mother is a narcissist and Charlotte actually is not constantly trying to make their life harder. But then she proceeds to repeatedly many times talk about how she's specifically making choices to piss off her parents. They never liked anyone she dated, which is probably why she chose the people she did. And then later she's picking a dress and she specifically wants to pick a dress that she knows her mom hates, in part because she knows her mom hates it. And it's like, I think maybe they were kind of a little bit right. I'm going to start a spoiler section for the following complaints because I guess I'm now in the second quarter, so maybe some of this could be counted as spoilers. So spoilers starting now as I continue to go through my notes and nitpick things. We get this scene in a church because Aldo's not a practicing Catholic, I guess, but he goes to church every Sunday, which seems kind of practicing, but I don't know. I'm not Catholic. I guess there are other things involved, but she asks to come with him to church. And in church, he's doing equations on his leg because he likes math. So he's doing math on his leg. And she picks up his hand and puts it on her leg so he'll continue to do math touching her thigh, which feels a little presumptuous based on their current level of knowing each other. Also the fact that she's in a relationship, but okay. And she says, not in a sexual way, in her opinion. But then less than one page later, we get, it fluttered over her and she fought the urge to grab his hand to place it somewhere else that would benefit from this degree of frenetic concentration. It suddenly got really sexual. Okay. And I'm an atheist, so I don't really care. But in a church? Good Lord, break up with your boyfriend and then get a room. She knew, after all, which of his motions looked practiced and which of them did not. Again, you've met maybe 3 times now. You don't know each other at all. Yet, but okay. Her ribs expanded, stretching out to make room. She felt intensely aware of her breasts. Men writing women, except it's a woman writing a woman. And then as they're saying goodbye, she says, I, and then cuts herself off, and her internal monologue says, don't hold hands with anyone ever again. Like, I think a border has been crossed, okay? A line has been crossed. Go home, break up with your boyfriend, and get a room. Then she goes home and does not break up with her boyfriend because the next scene we see is Aldo running into her and her boyfriend, who is not broken up with. So great. He's also described as deeply Caucasian, which is just funny to me. I don't really have any notes. I just find that funny. as someone who probably could be described as deeply Caucasian myself. And she says herself, "You're wondering if I've broken up with Mark." She hasn't. And he says, "Don't tell me." She says, "Well, I'm going to talk to myself then." But then still doesn't say that she broke up with Mark because she hasn't. She's still inviting Aldo to the anniversary party though. She's climbing on the back of the motorcycle. Again, feels very much like a men writing woman moment. There was a moment where she grappled with her options, determining whether to lean first and therefore subject herself tits up to instant intimacy. Alrighty then. Feel free to tell me if you can decipher this sentence. They're on a motorcycle. This is her first time on a motorcycle. She does make sure to tell us, to make it very clear, that she's been invited to ride on men's motorcycles before. But anyway, this is her first time on a motorcycle. She's sitting behind Aldo. For Regan's part, once she dismissed her concerns about her hair, she could see why he preferred it. The lack of 4 doors and a steel frame around her altered her perception of her environment, freeing a new old restlessness the further they and she began to blend. I'll put that on the screen so you can pause it and read it. Feel free to tell me if you can identify what they means in this sentence. I'll even include more of the paragraph before what I read out loud if you want more context. If you can tell me what they means, you win. I don't know what you win. You'll win something. I'll give you something. I swear. Again, Regan being a terrible person, talking with her boyfriend, who says, "Do I need to worry about you with this Aldo guy?" Which, yes, he does. And then, of course, she takes the tack of just making fun of Aldo, even though he does actually have to worry about Aldo because she's falling for him hard, or at least lusting for him hard. He's my friend. Plus, come on, you've met him. It'll be hilarious. Super rude. This is so irrelevant. It's so unnecessary to the story, but it annoys me. Was anything more needlessly palatial than a diner? Yes. I could think of lots of things that are more needlessly palatial than your average diner. Diners are typically not that palatial. What kind of diners are you frequenting? Diners actually have to house people. Presumably, like you need customers and employees, so them being big kind of makes sense. Although again, every diner I've been in has not been describable as palatial. But also there are so many things in the world that literally don't have to be big that are huge for no reason. Diner would not be anywhere on that list at all. Again, it doesn't matter, but it's like, what are you saying? No. Several times Regan climbs on counters or sits in sinks, which is a weird thing to do. I remember learning that people did this relatively recently and being very shocked. As a tall woman, I have never felt particularly drawn to sit on a counter or in a sink, like in a bathroom sink. I have been informed that apparently this is something common for short girls to do, like very small women to do, so they can get closer to the mirror, which I guess makes sense. I've always been tall enough to sort of lean over the mirror and get close. I don't have to sit in a sink. Seems strange to me. Also, I guess I would be concerned that I would break something because I'm almost 6 feet tall. But also, Regan is described several times as being very tall, so it feels weird that she is. How does she fit in the sink? It's a logistical question. If you've read the book, then that has extra layers. But anyway, the first time she does it, she's masturbating as quickly as possible before going to work instead of breaking up with her boyfriend, which just kind of sets up things to come, the dynamic we're getting. She also, like I said, weirdly obsessed with Aldo's bad haircut, which his dad gave him, which she continues to insult in her own mind and to him directly, eventually forces him, maybe not forces him, but she inserts herself into his apartment to cut his hair. And when she's done, she says, "Now it looks like somebody cares about you," which is so many layers of fucked up because you know that his dad cut his hair and he already told you his dad is like his best friend in the world, basically his only friend. Who cares about him? So you're implying that the only person in his life other than you that he's close to doesn't care about him? Because he's not good at giving haircuts, or in your subjective opinion is not good at giving haircuts? Imagine the audacity Regan must have. She cuts his hair and then starts running her hands over his face, like over his temple and his cheekbone, while he curls his fingers around the back of her knee, and she runs her hands through his hair. Her breath is quickening. They're looking at each other in the mirror, which again, he's straddling the toilet facing the wall and she's cutting his hair behind it, but somehow they're both looking in the mirror. So is the mirror behind the toilet? I guess I could see a bathroom setup where it's behind the vanity and the toilet. Seems weird though, because then if you stand to pee, you'd be staring at yourself in the mirror while you pee. Maybe there are bathrooms like that, but that sounds like terrible design. Anyway, break up with your boyfriend. She wanted to break up with him from the start, but she's still not doing it. And then they have another conversation where Mark is like, okay, so this guy, what exactly are you doing? I mean, what are you doing with him, Regan? Am I not paying you enough attention? You like him, Mark observed. Is that an accusation? She asked, glancing at him. He didn't answer. I mean, it's not really an accusation. It's an observation. As it said, Mark observed. Also, it's true. You do like him. Obviously, you know you like him. Then we move on again to talking about how thin she is. Once again, she'd lost some weight in recent months. She'd been thinner in her criminal days. Sleep had been something of a rarity at the time. Blah, blah, blah. She'd skipped a fair amount of meals. Again, why do we need to know this detail? I don't know. And then Mark says, Regan, if this guy is, I mean, if he's just something you need to get out of your system, I mean, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I'd like to know, he amended with a dry laugh, but you know, something in her stomach twisted. This was happening entirely off schedule. Mark wasn't supposed to lose his possessiveness over her until at least a year into marriage. So you'd rather he be angrily jealous? What are you doing, girl? Girl, even if he is a dick, she shouldn't be cheating on him. Like, she has crossed so many lines at this point. Sometimes it feels like she's trying to justify her actions and the things she's doing to him by trying to frame him as a terrible person so that she doesn't have to feel bad about doing bad things to him. You know, she then goes from that confrontation directly to picking out what dress she's going to wear to her parents' anniversary party and thinking about how if she picks a specific dress, she can't wear underwear or a bra and she'll have lots of bare back. And if she dances with Aldo, which she will definitely force him to do, he'll have to touch her on her bare skin in a bunch of places. So it's like, okay, again, break up with your boyfriend and just go for Aldo since you want to. Then she gets turned on imagining Aldo touching her bare skin. So she goes into the bathroom and starts touching herself in the bathtub. Multiple times she climbs into the bathtub, either to have phone calls or to masturbate. I literally cannot imagine ever wanting to just sit in a cold, dry bathtub for any reason. Like, so uncomfortable. Maybe they have the most comfy bathtub in existence, but it would still be cold and hard and uncomfortable if there's no water in the bath, you know? Weird. Anyway, she starts touching herself, and this leads into, once again, her, in a weird sort of men writing women way, being hyper aware of her body and her thinness. I'm not going to read this paragraph in detail because I found it actually very triggering how she was describing her bones and her eating habits. Just unsettling. And the way it's being romanticized and talked about is really uncomfortable for me as someone in recovery from an eating disorder. Not to sound like a broken record, but I will bring it up every time I notice it in books because diet culture and eating disorders and the romanticization of thinness against all odds and regardless of health is not healthy and okay, and I will always push back against it and always notice it and always point it out. She was turned on imagining Aldo touching her bare body. She got more turned on touching her own very thin body and feeling her bones sticking out. Started picturing Aldo while touching herself, and then Aldo calls her and they have a conversation, and then she decides she's just gonna keep touching herself while they're on the phone without telling him. She contemplates telling him that she's touching herself, thinking about him and how like men love that. I should totally do that. And then she chickens out. But then she keeps touching herself to completion while on the phone with Aldo without telling him, which might not be easily definable as sexual assault or sexual harassment, but it's certainly crossing boundaries and ignoring his autonomy and consent in this situation. If someone was talking to me on the phone while masturbating, especially someone I have never had any sexual relationship with. I mean, even if I had, if they didn't tell me, that would be crossing lines. But like someone that you just have met a handful of times and don't have a sexual or romantic relationship with, masturbating to you on the phone live without telling you is so unsettling and crossing so many lines. And again, this is just one of the many reasons why I really struggle with Regan as a character. Not okay. If Aldo was the one to do this, it would be even more obvious reading it how creepy that is and how line crossing that is and unsettling that is. But this book is framing it like Regan is just such a sexy femme fatale and she's so sex positive and in touch with her feelings, which like masturbating is great and healthy. Do it, but also do it if you're in the presence of someone else, even if it's, you know, over a phone line with their consent. Don't bring other people into your sexual experiences without getting their consent first. Seems basic. At one point, Aldo's smoking a joint and he thinks they don't tell you how close smoking is to setting yourself on fire. It's not. It's not close to setting yourself on fire. Like, not at all, actually. Regan starts sort of dissociating, speaking to herself as if she were her mother. And then Aldo's trying to sort of shake her out of it and says, Regan, look at me. Wake up. Tell the voice in your head to be quiet, would you? I know you're not here right now. I know you're lost somewhere that I can't go or touch or see. But look me in my green eyes and tell me what else matters. Bees, Regan. Think of the bees. Oh yeah, I didn't mention that Aldo's obsessed with bees. That's probably the most normal thing about this book. Bees are interesting. I like bees. But just bees, Regan, think of the bees. The most ridiculous part of this paragraph is him trying to pull her out of a dissociative episode by telling her to look him in his green eyes. Like, who says that? I've literally never turned to someone going into a panic attack, getting really internal, struggling, and tried to break them out of it by saying, look me in my brown eyes. Like, why is that a relevant detail? We already know he has green eyes. It's been brought up a million times, but it's so weird and unnatural for him to refer to his own green eyes like that. It makes me think of the captain of the Destriers and his gray eyes that were mentioned like 100 and something times in One Dark Window that I absolutely lost my shit over because it was ridiculous and so repetitive and just melodramatic. If I am a lover of impossible problems, then you will have loved me for my impossibilities. What? No, what? If you are a lover of impossible problems, okay, then they will have loved you for your impossibilities. Those things are not connected. Just because you love impossible problems does not mean that Regan will love you for your impossibilities. She could love you for other reasons, unrelated to impossibilities. Just because you said impossible and impossibilities does not mean that those are referring to the same thing and that the two parts of the sentence are actually connected. Anyway, she sneaks into his room late at night and offers sex, and he turns her down and she gets really mad. Once again, Regan, I am begging you to break up with your boyfriend. Those eyes in real life were weapons, or possibly anti-weapons. Once again, I am asking you, what does this mean? The other half of her truths was a lie. Care to expand? What are you trying to say with that? It just moves on immediately after that. She leaned forward. He matched her distance again, their foreheads meeting like old friends. A cliche simile, but fine. Hello, how are you? Been a long time. How nice it is to be here with you. I guess that's their foreheads talking to each other. Their hands, meanwhile, stayed back like tired captives, wary prisoners of war. What an odd choice of simile. Their hands are tired captives, wary prisoners of war, because they just haven't touched each other yet. Their hands have not moved yet. Why is that the simile you chose? What are you trying to get me to envision about this? What am I supposed to be inferring about the relationship based on these similes? Are they just the first similes you can come up with? Like tired captives are less likely to move because they're tired and wary? Sure. Are Regan and Aldo's hands actually tired and wary, or are they just hesitant to actually touch each other? Because that's a different thing. Behold the brilliance of this prose. Let me be the one to want you in such a way as to acquiesce that you want me. What? Regan's gonna want Aldo so bad that he has to admit that he wants her too, I guess. But the sentence is so clunky and strange and unspecific unnecessarily that it makes it so much harder to get to such a simple idea than it has to be. Why would you word it like that? And then we get Aldo apparently being a teenager trapped in an adult man's body because he's sort of struck dumb by the idea that Regan has showered in the same building as him, which means she's been naked in the same building as him, which is just mind-blowing to him. Imagine if he knew that she masturbated on the phone with him naked in a bathtub. He's thinking to himself, somewhere in his proximity, somewhere within these very walls, she'd been naked. She'd let the stream of water spill down from the top of her scalp, cracking like an egg and dripping down her forehead. It went from a juvenile but sexy imagination of her being wet and naked in a shower to the imagery of water cracking on her head like an egg and dripping down her forehead. Once again, what a weird simile to choose. And then she offers sex. He says he would in fact rather see her art than have sex right now. And she gets upset and decides in this moment, I guess that she thinks this will convince him, is reminding him that she has a boyfriend. And despite that she's there with him, as if some sort of like ancestral manly urge will explode from his testosterone glands to overcome him with manliness, to be like, you're right, I could steal you from another man. You know what this means, don't you? I have some idea. Of course you do. You're a genius. Once again, show us the proof. I thought that I do, he said. But then you said I could only have one key, he said. She blinked. You realize this could be your only chance, she told him. Well, then I don't want it. That information seemed to dizzy her. Because he's rejected her, feels bad. She sort of closes in physically. She pulls her knees into her chest. I feel wrong. Like, yeah, you were trying as hard as you could to cheat with someone who really wasn't interested in having sex with you in this moment. You should feel wrong. Break up with your boyfriend. Why are you doing this? Aldo was remembering his conversation with his dad earlier. His dad calls him regularly to ask him where they are today as like a grounding ritual, and Aldo just makes something up. And this time he says, we're trapped inside a star, which is locked inside a system, which is itself in a galaxy we can't escape, and we are lost to each other, to ourselves, and to the inconsequence of space. Which again, is just inserted here, and it's like, okay, I guess that's supposed to sound metaphysical and transcendental and smart and interesting, but it's like, okay, he's just making up random shit to tell his dad. This has no connection to what's happening right now. It's just a conversation he had earlier with a different character. Also not real. Also not possible to be trapped inside a star, at least not still be alive. So what are you talking about? It's just words. It's just words at this point. Just words and images randomly collaged together. Regan, he thought. Regan, this night is stolen. I want grand larceny, and this is petty theft. I'm sorry, that is so dramatic. It's so pompous. She shuts down. I can't give you that, she said, but he only heard it after he felt it. The shutting of the doors and barring of the windows. Somewhere inside her, she was triple checking the locks, swallowing whatever keys remained, tossing them into the flames and melting them down to be fashioned as jewelry, as armor, as chains. She was remaking herself as a vault, and he felt it, the way she drifted away from him even before she slid his hand from his, which, like, fine as imagery, it's fine. It's just so fucking dramatic. It's so dramatic. And after his line of, I want grand larceny, and this is petty theft, I just, stop it. I don't have that key anymore, she said. I probably never did. I know, he thought. I know. If you find it, he told her, and didn't finish the sentence. It's just getting more melodramatic the longer it goes. She stepped back from the bed, one long leg enough to brace her steadily against the floor, and he felt the steps she took away from him like aftershocks beneath her feet. I also love the point that one of her long legs was enough to brace her steadily against the floor, as if someone with a shorter leg wouldn't be able to stand on the floor. Like, I'm pretty sure however long your leg is, you can brace yourself against the floor with your leg because your torso is closer to the floor relative to the length of your leg. It would be one thing if she was still sitting on the bed, and the point is that her leg is long enough for it to reach the floor even when she's sitting on the bed, which I feel like even short people can do because beds are typically not that high. But anyway, what would I know? I do have long legs because I'm very tall. Regardless, it says that she stepped back from the bed, which implies that she is now standing and not on the bed, in which case, once again, I present to you the fact that however long your legs are, they reach the ground. Mind-blowing, I know. Good night, he told her, and the door opened, and then it closed, and then she was gone from him. Gone, as she had never been before. And that's where I stopped reading, because it was the 50% mark, and also because I was ready to throw the book against the wall. And that's it for spoilers, I guess, and that's also it for all my thoughts on the first half. I didn't read every single one of my notes and highlight every single sentence that pissed me off, but I did quite a few of them. I know so many of you will be yelling at this video for me to just DNF it and move on, and I wish I could, but my Taurus moon just won't let me. And I do, in fact, still hope that somehow the second half is so incredible that I kind of forget how much I suffered through the first half. I don't even see how that could be possible at this point, but if it was, I would be grateful. I think it's more likely that I will continue to be incredibly frustrated all the way through, but at this point, once again, I am so stubborn. I can't help it. It's just part of my personality. And out of spite, I'm going to finish this so I can give you a review of this entire book, fully informed, having read every single word, many of them multiple times, trying to make sense of what the heck she's actually trying to say and why. What is going on? Again, I get worked up. I'm a passionate person. I'm also dramatic. I have a degree in theater. We tend to be dramatic. I don't know what to tell you. I've always been a very expressive person. Okay, that doesn't mean that this is terrible. Different people have different opinions on what is good and what isn't. Some people might think that all of that made total sense, and they think that the writing is beautiful, and they don't find it frustrating at all, and they find the characters amazing and relatable or so complex, fascinating, whatever. By the many, many, many 5-star reviews, that's clearly true, and that doesn't mean that those people are wrong just because I don't agree. I'm just one person with my own subjective opinion of this. I am suffering though. Once again, can't help but be honest. That's what this channel is for. And I'm stubborn as hell, so I'm gonna finish it and I'll tell you what I think. Now you might be asking yourself, is this the only book you're reading in October? Because you haven't read any other books. You spent 3 weeks on a single book. I know, I did. It might be a 1-book month, which is maybe a failure, but as many of you reminded me in several of the videos, both on TikTok and Instagram and here on YouTube, I made up the rules, so it doesn't really matter if I break them, I guess. Can you tell? I'm a recovering perfectionist. I really struggle with breaking rules, even if I made them up arbitrarily. Anyway, some of you, when you heard I was having a hard time, told me to make a dedicated video. This might unintentionally become a dedicated rant review of Alone with You in the Ether. I'm tired. Anyway, hey friends, I finally finished Alone with You in the Ether. It took me almost the entire month to read this single book, which is very unusual for me. I had so many thoughts, as you already know from the first half update. This book managed to put me into a serious reading slump for a few weeks, and I struggled so much getting through it, but I just needed to finish it because I have heard such amazing things about this book from so many of you specifically, and also just the internet at large. It's such a popular book. It's such a beloved book. And I wanted to understand what people were talking about when they said that this was such a beautiful love story, or that it was such a relatable, impactful, emotional book, or when they said it was so gorgeously written and so quotable. I wanted to understand what people were saying, and the first half, as you saw, was so hard for me to get through that I had to finish it. I had to know if the second half made up for the first half. And for me personally, while the second half was better than the first half, ironically, in a lot of reviews I've seen, people loved the first half and hated the second half. Could not disagree more. But didn't make up for how much I struggled through the first half. The first half was so hard for me to get through, and I had such a bad time that it would have been quite the challenge to make up for it in the second half. There are a few things that it could have done to make me enjoy it a little bit more, at least in terms of the character arcs and the relationship development that did not happen, unfortunately. But I did prefer the writing style in the second half. I did prefer the pacing in the second half. And I was going to say the plot. There's very little plot in this book, but the second half I felt had a little bit more drive to it. It felt like We were moving forward, things were happening. And because of the writing style shift that happens in the second half, it was a lot less word salad, masturbatory feeling, which was something I struggled with so much in the first half, as I already talked about ad nauseum in the first half review. So I'll try not to harp on that over and over again. Before I get into my thoughts in more detail, of course, as always, as in all my reviews, this is just my opinion. I am one reader. I am one person. Every one of us, when we read books, come to them with our own expectations and preferences and biases and lived experiences and pet peeves, moods. And for that reason, every one of us reads a different book. Essentially, when I read Alone with You in the Ether, I am not having the same experience as anyone else might have. And I'm not even having the same experience as I would have had last year, or 5 years ago, or 10 years from now. So keep that in mind. I did not love reading this. I didn't have a great experience with it. And I'm not telling you you're wrong to love it if you do, or that you shouldn't. So please don't let my opinion of this book ruin it for you if you loved it. If you think that hearing my not so positive review of this is going to ruin your experience, maybe don't watch the rest of this review. I truly don't want to ruin books for people. Also, I want to make it very clear that any opinions I have about Regan as a character are not my opinions of people with mood disorders in general. Regan is a fictional character, and while she does have a mood disorder, she is also a fictional human with all kinds of experiences and her own personality, and she makes her own decisions. And while the choices she makes in this book and her behaviors are informed by her symptoms, especially because Olivie Blake herself has a mood disorder and is writing from her own experience on that, she is more than her mood disorder. She is a whole person, if fictional, and my opinions on her choices and her as a character and the way she was written are not the same as my opinion of people with mood disorders. So I just want to be very clear about that, because while I personally don't have a mood disorder, I have ADHD, and there are a lot of overlapping symptoms between ADHD and mood disorders. Many adult women with ADHD are misdiagnosed as having mood disorders. It is such a common experience. It happens all the time because of those overlapping symptoms. So I can relate to a lot of the things that Regan experiences, while they may be to different intensities and not quite present the same, because I don't have the same condition. So anyway, I'm just saying that because I don't want anyone to think that my overall pretty negative opinion of Regan as a character is a reflection of how I feel about people with mood disorders. The bipolar experience is not a monolith, and Regan is not a real person. So just putting that out there. That being said, I don't really love the way this book handles mental illness, or at least perspectives on treatment. Once again, as someone who is neurodivergent, I also have struggled with other mental illnesses throughout my life. I had very severe anxiety and panic attacks for many years. I was severely depressed for a while and on antidepressants. I had an eating disorder. I know mental illness, okay? I've been there. I feel it. I understand the struggles. What I also understand now that I'm in my 30s, after being in therapy for a decade, after being in a serious relationship for over a decade, you are responsible for your own actions, even if they are caused by symptoms of mental illness or neurodivergence or personality disorder, especially when you are in a relationship with someone. A diagnosis is an explanation, but it's not an excuse. And that can be really hard to fully understand and fully synthesize, especially because it can be really hard to separate for yourself. And I know this full well. What is your condition and what is you and your personality? And I understand the urge to claim your symptoms as part of yourself and to yearn for the kind of love that accepts you for everything that you are, for all of your flaws, the kind of love that lets you just be as you are, not having to mask, not having to pretend, not having to hide. And while on the one hand, I think that's a beautiful thing to want, and I understand wanting that so much. I promise you, I personally relate. I also think it's not okay to impose our own mental illness on our partners without taking responsibility for ourselves and at least trying as much as we can with all the resources available to us to take care of ourselves, to reduce the severity of our symptoms, to reduce the impact on our partner, and to develop healthier coping mechanisms. And it's hard, okay? And it's not going to be a steady journey. It's going to be a roller coaster up and down. Different circumstances in your life are going to impact how you're doing, definitely. And ideally, you're with a partner who understands that and who will love you through the hard times and the good. But if you love your partner, you try to be the best version of yourself for them. And that includes people who are neurotypical and don't have mental illnesses. They ideally also are working on their flaws and trying to become a better person and getting better at handling their stress so they don't lash out at their partner, et cetera, right? So that is something that I think is really important. And it's something that I have worked really hard on in my own life. I struggle a little bit with how this book presents self-acceptance as the end-all be-all and kind of throws out the idea of responsibility for your impact on other people. That being said, this book does present therapy as a good thing, and we do see Regan committing to therapy in a way that she hadn't before and really trying in therapy, which is great. I do think that the way that this book presents mental illness as so intrinsically linked with who we are that reducing your symptoms is removing parts of yourself or removing parts of your personality is not a super healthy outlook. And that extends to how this book handles the medication situation. I can relate to taking medications that don't feel right for you, that don't make you feel good, that you decide are not the right choice for you. I have been there. I've also been in a place where medication was a lifesaver and made such a huge difference. And I can't imagine getting through certain parts of my life without medication. And there are a lot of people out there, specifically with mood disorders, but also with all kinds of mental illnesses and conditions that cannot function without their medication. And that's something that is very briefly mentioned in the author's note, but both the book itself and the author's note sort of rush past that to focus on this idea that you are potentially more yourself and also more able to be creative if you go medication free. And I think that is not the most responsible message. It's a very complex issue. It's a very nuanced issue. And I don't love how this book framed it. And I've seen a lot of people comment on that, and quite a few people mention that the author's note sort of absolves Blake of responsibility for how it's represented in the book itself, because she asserts that the way it's presented in the book was not her intention, but I don't think that an author's note can make up for an entire novel with a specific message, especially because lots of people don't read author's notes. And even if they do, if you have to write an author's note clarifying your intention and that your intention isn't the very obvious conclusion people would draw from reading your book, then you didn't write your book clearly enough for the message you were trying to share, right? At least that's my opinion. So that's not to say that medication is right for everyone, but it also is right for a lot of people. And it's not just your own experience that should be taken into account when it comes to medication. It's also the experience of your loved ones. It might be worth putting up with some side effects if life is significantly better for your romantic partners, for your family, for your children when you take medication. And not everyone has the kind of privilege that Regan has and that Olivie Blake has to go medication free and to let themselves cycle through the manic and depressive episodes as they come. Anyway, I'll get more into that in the spoiler section. I did take the time to sort of write out my thoughts bullet point style because I knew that I would ramble on for possibly hours if I didn't. So I have my notes here. I'm going to refer to them to make sure that I don't go too off track. So my first category is the writing style. I already talked at length about the first half, but I do really struggle with the way that this is talked about. Like it's the most beautiful poetic writing because it really feels like it is aesthetic over communication. And like I think I said in the first half, they're the kinds of sentences that sound beautiful and deep unless you look at them too closely. And when you look at them more closely, when you try to break them down, when you try to analyze them, when you think about them more, they fall apart. And to me, beautiful writing and great writing is writing that stands up to repeated reading and to analysis and to close reading. It really feels like the writing in the first half especially sacrifices clear communication with the reader for aesthetics and to be as quotable as possible. When people say this book is incredibly quotable, it is, and that's to its detriment. I think Olivie Blake, whether intentionally or not, especially in the first half, wrote a bunch of quotes that you might see posted on Instagram with a pretty beach background that people reshare without having a true deeper meaning, whether they're just truisms that we've heard a million times before, or ideas that, again, sound great until you look a little bit deeper and realize that they don't quite make sense or don't really add anything new to the conversation or sort of contradict themselves or are just kind of platitudes. This book might have been my purple prose aha moment for my entire life. I have not understood why people hate purple prose, and I've talked about how I kind of like it. I like really overwritten, overwrought, descriptive, lyrical, complex prose. I like books that are pretentious a lot of the time. And so I've struggled to understand what people mean when they say that they don't like purple prose. But here I think I know what people mean, because I could see how people would call this purple prose. And I also could see what people mean when they say writing that is beautiful without substance. It's the aesthetic. It's very shallow, not rife with meaning. Again, doesn't hold up to further analysis. Prettiness. And that's it. You can see how obviously it's not one clear definition and it's going to be so subjective. So I can understand now what people mean. And while I don't agree for a lot of books that I've read that I did feel had a lot of meaning, rich meaning to explore, and that the writing was really scrumptious and lush and added so much to the story, if people reading those books were feeling the way I was feeling reading this, then I understand why they hate purple prose so much and why they didn't enjoy those books as much as I don't agree about which ones I would categorize that way. So I find that kind of funny that this one book has sort of completely shifted my perspective on purple prose. I don't think I'm going to keep saying that I like purple prose now. I'm going to have to come up with a better term to describe the books that I love that have that really intricate, layered, rich, lyrical, scrumptious, overwrought perhaps in some people's opinions, very detailed, very poetic writing style that still feels backed by a lot of intention and meaning and depth. Because I do believe that complex, symbolic writing should reward rereading with deeper meaning. Every time you reread something that is well written, it should reveal more to you. It should have so much depth, so much to discover. And this one falls apart the second you analyze it. It's like a hall of mirrors that seems palatial, but that's an illusion, not the reality. Like I said, the writing style shifts in the second half, and I did prefer it. It shifts to mirror Regan's mental state. And I thought that was really well done thematically and as a window into her mind, into her lived experience as our protagonist. I thought that was really well done. It was a great use of structure and writing style to deepen the character development. I also just preferred the writing style in the second half. It was much more chaotic and stream of consciousness. But because it was much less calculated and languid in its pacing, there just was less time for the riffing and overly repetitive sentences that just went on forever and the abundance of weird metaphors and similes. There was so much more happening. The pacing was faster. The thoughts were going faster. And so they were a lot more naturalistic. And that, to me, vastly improved the reading experience. But even in the second half, we get a few moments of referring to Aldo doing things with his green eyes. His green eyes pleaded with her. He looked her up and down with his green eyes. I feel like it comes from romance novels. I have seen it the most in romantasy, and it just drives me up the wall to constantly refer to someone's eye color every time they do anything or they look at anything. but it made me laugh out loud every time it happened because it just came up in the most ridiculous times that were meant to be really somber and serious. And then his green eyes would do something and I would just completely lose it. I just had to note on page 198, when they've started having sex, there's a whole section that's just them having sex, page after page after page. And I saw some people complain about that and not like that, which is fair. Honestly, I didn't mind it that much because, you know, sex is a part of life. Sex can be great. I'm happy for them that they're having a good time. You know, I don't really mind. It wasn't super my thing necessarily, but I also wasn't offended by it. I wasn't all that turned off by it. It was fine. I think it is definitely a stage a lot of people go through early in a relationship when you are more in limerence with the other person than anything else, and you're just kind of obsessed with them and your appetite is voracious. I think a lot of us go through that, so it felt realistic, and it also felt fitting for the kind of relationship they have that is quite passionate and intense and obsessive. So fine. But I do take issue with page 198, where they've had sex however many times at this point. We get a paragraph where she is thinking about how she wants to quiet her thoughts with sex, which nearly always works, and how she likes sex with Aldo. She has already lost herself many times, many ways, so she wants to do it again and thinks it will be familiar. But with him, nothing is familiar, and sex is the least of it. It isn't nothing. She sleeps with her hand wrapped around his cock, just to comfort her subconscious with the shape of it. Pardon? I'm sorry, that was so funny to me, and it was so out of nowhere. It's this really serious, page-long rumination about how she uses sex as sometimes maybe an unhealthy coping mechanism and to drown out everything else she's feeling, to sort of numb herself out, and how it hasn't always been the best option for her necessarily, or the healthiest option, especially when it involved cheating on a partner or being the other woman as someone else is cheating on their partner, and conflates it with drug use. And then we just get this, everything is different with Aldo. This isn't just sex, this is real love. She loves him so much that it's comforting to her in her sleep to just gently hold on to his cock. I don't want to kink shame if that's your thing. So happy for you, but it just was so out of the blue, and it's very funny to me thinking of someone using their partner's genitals as a comfort item to sleep with. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. It had required more permission to kiss her lips, to share her breath, than to slide inside her pussy to occupy her cunt. Anyway, it's a bit cringy at times, okay, but it's fine. Sex is great. Moving on to structure and storytelling. Like I said, I really enjoyed the way that the structure, the writing style mirrored Regan's state of mind. I thought that was really clever. And like I said, I preferred the writing style of the sort of chaotic stream of consciousness in the second half. It does become a bit hard to follow at times because it's very inconsistent about when it uses quotation marks and when it doesn't. I don't love that. It makes it a little bit harder to parse, but I think it made sense with Regan's state of mind and with what was happening narratively, so I will give it a pass for that, even though it does make it a bit more confusing. And typically I prefer when books use quotation marks and indicate who's speaking when, because it just makes it easier as a reader to know what's going on, which I appreciate. I felt in general like this book ended too soon, and I will expand upon that in a spoiler section, but I really thought that we were going somewhere really interesting with their dynamic and their relationship, and it feels like that is still in their future, but we ended too soon to see that happen. And it sort of presents a different reality, a different outcome, a different possible future for their relationship than I think is probably realistic for them. And I was a bit disappointed that it didn't commit all the way to what I thought it was going to do with their relationship. Also, the more I think about the entire book and the structure of it, I am very irritated by the concept of the 6 conversations, not only because it's just so random, but also because the actual conversations that they counted as their 6 conversations were sometimes not even actually conversations, but also often very short and very surface level. They talked about so few real life issues. They talked a lot about their occupations and their surface level interests and their hobbies. They shared a little bit about themselves and their backgrounds and their families, but they talked almost not at all about their values, their morals, their political beliefs, their opinions on the world at large, their feelings about society and the issues they're in. They really don't know where the other person stands on so many important issues. And that's kind of wild to me based on the way it's framed, as if these 6 conversations have brought them to know each other deeper than any other 2 people have ever known each other in the history of the world. And I'm not someone who thinks that you can't fall in love that quickly or that deeply with someone after just a few conversations, because I had that experience with my husband. We had maybe 4 conversations before we fell in love, and then maybe another 4 before we were so head over heels in love with each other that we knew that the other person was our person forever. And we've been together ever since, and it's been over a decade. I think it's doable and it's possible, but the conversations we had were much longer. We talked about many more topics. We talked about our values and our perspective on all facets of life, what we wanted out of life, but also how we felt about all kinds of issues. And we really dug into our own histories, our traumas, our mental health, our families, our dynamic with our families and our friends. We ran the gambit of our experiences and our opinions on things big and small. And we got to know each other on such a deep level that we were able to fall in love very quickly. These conversations were so short and surface level that it's kind of laughable to me that they're treated like this life-changing probing of each other's minds, because they're the kinds of conversations that I would have with a stranger who's wearing a t-shirt with a bee on it, and I say, "Oh, cool shirt." And they're like, "Yeah, I love bees." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. Bees are great." And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Tell me about bees." And then they talk to me for 45 minutes about how cool bees are. And I'm like, "That's awesome. So cool. See you later." And we don't even exchange names. And we actually know nothing about each other except that they love bees and know things about bees. And I was open to hearing about bees. That's not a foundation for a serious relationship, though. Just felt like, for a book that is centered on 2 characters who are supposed to be so intellectual, so smart, so deep, not like other girls and boys, that their conversations were very shallow and very narrow in their focus. Never talked about politics, values, and I found that very frustrating. Speaking of that and the characters, generally my opinions on the characters have stayed consistent through the whole thing. I find Aldo very bland. It's cool that he likes bees so much and is good at math and rides a motorcycle and has green eyes, but he doesn't feel like a full person. He feels like a daydream of the perfect boyfriend who will fully accept you for all your flaws and will be willing to have sex anytime you have the urge to have sex, and is smart but also super hot and quiet enough that he's sort of unobtrusive in your life. And that feels kind of sad, to be honest, that he doesn't get to be his own person in his entirety. It's presented from the beginning that they're 2 people with their own mental illnesses, and they find each other and they complete each other and they accept each other fully. But I don't feel that she's ever really aware of his mental illness, or that they ever explore it in any depth, or that she ever contends with it or faces it or tries to support him through his mental illness in the way that he is for her. That is just part of the impression for me, that Aldo is not really a full character. Not that characters like him can't exist, but that people like him who exist are much more layered and complex than Aldo is shown to be. In terms of Regan, she is definitely more complex. She gets a lot more development, and I found her interesting at times. I think it was interesting to be let into her mind, but I did not particularly like her. I think she's a pretty mean person. She also, to me, comes across quite selfish in a lot of her behaviors throughout. Her unwillingness to accept the ways that her behavior impacts the people around her and impacts Aldo. And she has a few moments here and there of recognizing that maybe she was thinking about herself and her wants and needs rather than considering what Aldo wants or needs. But then she would very quickly forget to take him into account again and just continue to do whatever she wanted, sort of regardless of how it impacts him. So I didn't love Regan as a character. I think she was more complex for sure than Aldo, though not as well explored and well developed as I would hope for a book that is so plotless and so character driven. I think this would have been a much more interesting book if we had been let in even deeper to her mind and shown more of who she is. And also if she had been able to develop more self-awareness so we could see that shift from kind of her being in denial and a little bit of her self-delusion at the beginning of some of the ways that she can't accept that she is part of the problem in some of her relationships, for example. To be able to see her come to terms with that more at the end would have been great, but she really didn't change. She did change from the beginning to the end, but the change was sort of an external factor and not internally driven. So that was a little bit of a letdown for a book that is so character focused. Then we get to the relationship, and it's not a spoiler that they get together. I will say that I don't think their relationship is healthy on any level. Not that this book is presenting it as healthy, because I think it actually does show very clearly that their relationship is very codependent and obsessive, toxic, and unhealthy in many different ways, and that Aldo especially is losing himself in the relationship and in Regan in a way that is not sustainable. I do think that the way the book handles these issues and the way that it ends sort of contradicts its portrayal of this as an obsessive, unhealthy, toxic relationship. I have perused the reviews a little bit since finishing, and a lot of the lower star reviews talk about how unhealthy this relationship is and how they don't love that the book kind of romanticizes the toxicity and the obsession and the codependence and treats it like the height of romance. And people who love the romance and love this book seem to defend it by saying that the book obviously is presenting the relationship as toxic and unhealthy. I think that the way the book ends kind of contradicts that reading. Of course, it's up for debate and it's subjective, but like I said, I do feel like the book ended a little too soon, and I don't love the note it left off on. When the book ends makes it very easy to misread the intention if the intention was to present this as a very unhealthy, toxic, obsessive relationship. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the relationship dynamics and the ending in the spoiler section. The last section of my notes has to do with the themes. This book introduced a lot of themes, but it didn't really do anything with them. We bring up really big concepts like love and time and art and identity and mental illness and religion and faith. And all of these concepts, all these themes are explored in a really surface level and invoked for the vibes without really anything of note being said about them. I could not tell you what Olivie Blake was trying to tell us about love in this book, or what she was trying to tell us about art in this book, or what she wanted us to take away about faith and connection to religion or God from this book, or about time. The vastness of time, time travel. Did she have a purpose? Did she have a thesis statement? Did she have ideas she wanted to communicate to us, or was she bringing up all these ideas because they seemed lofty and intellectual and interesting? The only one that I think was explored a little bit more in depth is mental illness, and specifically the experience of living with a mood disorder. But I do think, like I already mentioned, that the messaging around that was a little bit muddied, and I'm not sure I love the angle it took, so it didn't land quite as well as it might have if I had felt that it was well executed, or if I'd agreed with the conclusions it was drawing. I will say that this entire book, the writing style, the ideas, it all makes a lot more sense if we take into account that Aldo, at least, is smoking joints this whole time, and Regan occasionally smokes joints with him, because to be honest, this whole book reminds me of conversations I've had with people while high. And if you've ever been sober in a room full of high people having conversations that they think are very intellectual and deep, you'll know what I mean. My experience of reading this book, because you can tell that people feel like they have found the meaning of life. They've transcended their corporeal form and grasped something beyond, something untouchable. They have ascended, and they truly think that they are uncovering ideas never before thought or communicated. And when you listen to the conversations as a sober person, it's just nonsense. It's word salad. Or like I mentioned about this book, it's platitudes that you've heard a million times, but it's being framed like a new discovery. And it's someone saying, did you ever notice that the sky is blue? And everyone is absolutely in awe of such a profound, brand new observation that they've never considered before. And I think I enjoy this book better when I think about it as two stoners who are having lots of conversations that they think are incredibly deep while high, in which case maybe they found their perfect match and happy for them, except that their relationship is not very healthy. But, you know, happy for the stoners who found their fellow stoners and are enjoying waxing poetic about time signatures or something. You can tell that my experience being high with people is with fellow artsy people and musicians because that has definitely been my experience. Anyway, I think those are all the thoughts that I can share in a non-spoilery fashion. So I'm going to try to do a fast spoiler section because I've already been talking longer than I planned to, and then we'll wrap this up. So spoilers for Alone with You in the Ether. Spoilers. This is going to spoil plot lines to do with Regan's mental illness and to do with their relationship and to do with the ending. So if you want to read this book, don't watch the spoiler section. Okay. I warned you. So starting with their relationship, it is deeply unhealthy. They start their relationship while Regan is in another relationship, and she continually claims that she didn't cheat on him, and they technically did not have sex until she broke up with Mark, but they are having an emotional affair for a while before they have sex. They also have physical contact in ways that I think most of us would feel crosses a line with a monogamous partner. So while the cheating may have not been actual penetration, there was what I think a lot of people would consider cheating. And it did annoy me that she never acknowledged to herself or to Mark or to her therapist that she cheated on him. And on top of that, while they may not have had sex while she was with Mark, she tried to have sex with him while she was still with Mark. And he's the one who refused her, and she was very upset about it. So it's not for lack of trying, right? And then once they're together, she regularly fantasizes about cheating on Aldo with other people. I also just found their relationship very unhealthy. Like I mentioned, I think, on the one hand, Aldo is a very flat character. He doesn't have a lot going on, so it's hard for him not to be lost in their relationship because there's just not a lot to his character in general. But if I try to think about him as a real person, the way that he loses himself in their relationship and the way that his wants and needs are completely overrun by hers is not a healthy or sustainable relationship. And it's acknowledged a few times by Aldo realizing that she doesn't seem to notice or care when he's not really into sex and just kind of does it anyway because she wants it, or doesn't really seem to notice when he wants to stay home and is overstimulated and doesn't want to be at a party or something, and she drags him along with her. He never makes clear to her that it's important to him that his wants and needs are also respected, that he is given space in the relationship, that he is an equal partner with her. And they break up near the end of the novel, which I was cheering for. Aldo finally standing up for himself and in part realizing that she was not allowing him to be an equal partner with her in their relationship, only for them to get back together and never have that conversation and just go on as if suddenly all the issues of the relationship have disappeared because they've decided to be together again. And again, I don't see how it can be sustainable without them really putting concerted effort into this dynamic to make sure that Regan's more outgoing, passionate, decisive, charismatic personality doesn't fully override Aldo's quieter, more introverted, more easygoing vibe. Also, we get some pretty wild depictions of codependency, and just codependency on such a ridiculous level where they've been dating for an incredibly short period of time. They've only known each other for a very short time, and they can't spend a single week apart without Regan starting to think about ways to not even ask Aldo to come home, but manipulate him to come home. She thinks about ways she could make herself sick with something like pneumonia, so it would be an emergency, and he would have to come back so she wouldn't be alone anymore, instead of just telling him that she missed him and wanted him to come back. But still, not being able to spend a week apart is not healthy. Not wanting to spend a week apart is normal and fine. And the fact that their codependency was just framed, to me, my impression was that it was being framed as very romantic, like they were meant for each other. They were such soulmates that they no longer could exist apart, which is just not healthy in my own subjective opinion. This book also seems to present the passion of their relationship, not just sexual passion, but also the amount that they fight. I think Regan says that she knew she was in love with him after their first fight. It's framing this really volatile passion between them, which I would generally categorize as toxicity, as real love, as desirable, as soulmates, as the pinnacle of true love. You know you really love someone when you care enough to fight them. And I just don't think that's a healthy outlook on life, nor is it particularly sustainable to build a life on that volatility. There is a trend in a lot of literature, and I get that it's maybe more exciting or interesting to read about, but there's this trend of romanticizing toxicity, romanticizing passion, and treating healthy, equal, respectful relationships as boring. And that makes me sad as someone who is very happily in a boring long-term relationship where we don't fight. We are both passionate people and we have passion for each other, but we don't have a volatile, intense, high-octane type romance. The comfort and the kindness and the stability of our relationship is something that I really value, and that makes it better, not worse. And I do sometimes get frustrated with the number of books that are presenting these volatile dynamics as desirable and the pinnacle of love. That is not the kind of love that I personally want. To me, it feels like this book is glorifying the dysfunction in their relationship. And like I said, it ends too soon because they break up, then they get back together. And what I was waiting for was the second and final breakup, a realization of, no, actually, as much as we love each other, as much as we care about each other, as much as we want to be together, we actually haven't worked through any of our issues. We haven't worked on ourselves. We haven't had those open conversations. We haven't changed anything. And so it's still not working and we can't be together in this current state. Not to say that they couldn't be together in the future if they both worked on themselves and then also worked on their dynamic together to find that balance. But to end the book with them getting back together with nothing having changed and treating it like now they're fine and everything's going to be great. They're going to have a happily ever after together, even though they have not actually had any of those conversations and worked through any of their issues and tried to find a way to fit together. That to me is so unrealistic. And it does feel to me a little bit like it's romanticizing or glorifying this toxic, obsessive, codependent, dysfunctional dynamic between them because they end up together and it's framed as this great love story. I think them breaking up would have been a great ending to this, to be honest. And again, not that they couldn't get together again in future, or maybe there's an epilogue where they've spent time working on themselves and now have gotten back together and they've sort of come to this place of more respect for each other and more reciprocity. And it takes a lot of work and effort. And it is something that can be done while you stay in relationship with someone, but their dynamic was so dysfunctional, in my own personal opinion, that I think that would have been difficult to do. And I don't love the way that the book kind of waved away their issues as if they've been erased through the power of love or something. You know, all of these things, all of the issues in their relationship, while they are impacted by each of their mental illnesses, they are sort of independent of them as well. This is personality traits. This is the way that these characters act. This is a lack of consideration for the other person and a lack of altering, compromising on their life to let the other person in and to accommodate the other person. But also, I didn't love the way that this book handled the mental illness part of the equation. Not only do we never really address or dive deeper into Aldo's mental illness, his depression, his suicidality, his past addiction is just sort of hand waved away. But also for Regan, she suddenly goes off her meds, which is not something anyone should ever do. You really shouldn't suddenly stop your medication without talking to your doctor. She doesn't tell her psychiatrist that she's stopped medication. And not only is that not great medically, but also because she was court ordered to see the psychiatrist and to be on medication because she committed a crime. And after going off her medication, she commits another similar crime by forging art so she can steal a painting from her dad and sell it. For me, it felt like this book and the author's note both implied that medication dulls who you really are, that your mental illness is a core part of you, and that without allowing your mental illness to exist in the full breadth of it, to feel your symptoms fully, to, in the case of mood disorders, feel your swings through mania and depression fully to their full intensity, that you are numbing yourself, that you are losing part of yourself, and especially that you are losing your connection to your creative side, to your artistic side. Both Regan and Blake herself are framed as being unable to create when they are on medication. Regan can't paint, she can't create art when she's on medication. It's only when she's off her meds that she can paint and be creative and be an artist. And Blake herself says that she needed to go off medication to be able to be a writer, to write what she'd always wanted to write. And not only do I fundamentally disagree that you have to be off medication to be creative and to create art, I also think it's a bit of a dangerous idea to spread that if you want to be creative, or you want to be your full self, or you want to be free, that you have to go off your meds. And Olivie Blake in the author's note says she is not trying to be prescriptive about that. She's not saying everyone should go off her meds, that she understands that not everyone can go off their medication. But I still get the impression from the way she wrote the author's note and the way that she wrote this book and Regan that she kind of does believe that, or at least for herself and for this character, that that is the only right way. And I don't know how someone reading this who maybe feels numbed by their medication is not going to feel that this is validation to go off their medication, which not everyone can or should do. Everyone is different. Everyone's journey with medication is different. And also, medication is not one size fits all in terms of the actual medication. And that's something I struggled with here too. We don't see Regan's journey with medication. We don't see her try. I think she says at one point that she's trying a new medication during the book, or she just started a new medication, but we don't know how many medications she's tried, how many combinations, what dosages, taking them at different times, with food, without food, how she's taking care of herself in other ways. And she does talk about maybe not sleeping the best, and she drinks and does drugs and doesn't eat very much, which is a whole other topic that I don't even want to get into. I don't love the way that Regan's body is talked about, how her lack of eating is talked about, how she fetishizes her own thinness in the book. It was very unsettling as someone in recovery from an eating disorder to read, but that is a separate issue. Regan is not necessarily doing what she would need to do for her body to reduce possible side effects and to make her medication more effective. And we don't know how many things she's tried. Yes, there are cases where no medication is going to work for someone and they are going to be better off without medication. But this book doesn't really present it in a balanced, realistic way, and doesn't present the fact that while the first or second or third or fourth or fifth or 10th medication you try might not be the right one for you, that there might be one out there that does click, that does allow you to be your full self and to be creative and to feel like you are still yourself and have your feelings while managing your symptoms and making life easier for you and for the people you love. Medication can be incredible. And I think the way this book frames it is very one-sided, and I don't love that. I appreciate that Regan eventually embraces therapy. I appreciate that Blake talks about how important therapy was for her. So there's that, because I was a bit worried from how Regan was approaching therapy in the first half that she was going to just go without any therapy and without any medication. And that was going to be the message of the book, which as someone who's been in therapy for a decade and has had my life completely changed for the better through therapy, I would have hated that message personally. But therapy is not always enough. Medication can save lives. And Blake even acknowledges in the author's note that if she was still working a 9 to 5, she wouldn't be able to go off her medication. And I think that level of privilege is something that's not acknowledged in the book. Regan is independently wealthy. She has so much money from her parents that she doesn't have to have a job. She doesn't have a job. She's volunteering at her job. She is able to get rid of her apartment, donate all of her clothes and start fresh. She is able to spend as many days in bed as she wants to when she is in her depressive episodes. She's able to go out and buy whole new wardrobes, go on shopping sprees anytime she is in a manic episode. And there is no lasting impact on her because she is wealthy enough to not have to think about that. She doesn't have that precarity in her life. She has no dependence. And that's just not a common experience. 99.9% of people on the planet are not in that situation. And I am starting to get more and more frustrated with books that are framed as these really raw examinations of what it's like to live with mental illness. And every time they seem to be these really privileged, wealthy, often young, hot women who can sleep for a full year or go off their medication suddenly and toss all their belongings and start fresh because they are isolated from repercussions because they are so wealthy. That's just not a common experience. And I guess I am starting to get sick of reading those stories because they feel so disconnected from my reality and from the reality of literally every person I personally know who struggles with their mental illness. I know and love people with mood disorders, and they are not so wealthy that they can go with the flow of their mental illness and feel no repercussions. Most people can't do that. I went on antidepressants because my depression was so bad that I couldn't get out of bed and do things. And I had to get out of bed because I had to pay my bills. I had to continue to live my life, and I couldn't sleep for a year because I'm a normal person. And I am getting more and more frustrated and kind of upset, to be honest, at these really unrealistic depictions of mental illness that are dreamlike and idealistic and that claim you should just fully accept yourself for who you are and your mental illness is you, so you don't have to do any work on yourself at all. And it doesn't matter how it impacts you because you'll just persevere, even though most people can't live like that. And while, again, Olivie Blake acknowledges that, in the author's note, she goes on to wax poetic about how great it's been for her to be off medication, how much it's allowed her to be creative and have this amazing, successful career as an author, which again is a 1% experience. And the entire book frames going off medication as the best thing Regan could have possibly done for herself while she is in this position that the vast majority of people are not in. And a lot of people are not going to read the author's note and get that caveat from the author. If you need an author's note to explain that you were not trying to demonize medication and romanticize mental illness, then I don't think you were clear enough in the actual book you were writing. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I've been talking for ages. I didn't have a great time with this, obviously. I didn't love the characters. I didn't love the messaging. I didn't love the writing. I do think there were interesting aspects of this. There were ideas here and there that I found interesting. There were moments that I liked. There were a handful, maybe 5-ish quotes in the whole thing, 4 or 5 that I liked. But for me personally, this wasn't coherent enough and it didn't impact me emotionally enough for me to really take anything away from it. It did teach me that I do in fact dislike purple prose now that I have this example of it. So there's that. But yeah, this wasn't for me. And I've been teetering on what rating to give it, but honestly, I had such a rough time with this and it took me so long to finish it and it put me into such a slump that I have to give it 1 star. I'm so sorry. This was a 1-star experience if ever I've had one. Just not a fun time for me personally. So it just reinforces yet again how individual reading experiences can be. Reading is fun and weird and varied. Like that. And that's what makes it so interesting. So those are my thoughts on Alone with You in the Ether by Olivie Blake. What an experience this was. What a month in my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. Many of you will probably tell me I should have just unhauled it, but unfortunately, I have a brain that loves to complete things, and I have a brain that becomes curious and wants to know, and I also have a brain that wants to give every book the benefit of the doubt to the point of wanting to read every single word so I can ensure that I gave it a full chance before I review it, and that definitely hit me with this. I'm tired now, so I'm gonna go. That was my October Read It or Unhaul It reading vlog. Next month, in November, I will try to do better. We'll see how that goes. I've already spun the wheel, so I know what I'm going to be reading, but I'll leave you hanging for the next video to find out what that is. You can also follow me on Instagram or TikTok because at the end of the short form review of Alone with You in the Ether, I will reveal what book I'm reading next. So if you can't wait, you can find out on Instagram and or TikTok. But that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on Alone with You in the Ether in the comments down below and all the various topics we talked about in this video based on what was brought up in the book. And I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.